So basically, so far we've covered how to import models in Unreal Engine 5, how to create textures, how to use pre-made textures, because most of the textures which we're going to be using in our scenes are going to be pre-made. So you don't need to know too much about how to create advanced textures. That I think is not for beginners. I think it's very confusing because of the node system in Unreal Engine 5. However, using pre-made textures is pretty simple, and we've done that, right? So now let's move on to the next step, which is going to be the lighting. So for the lighting, what I'm going to do is that firstly, I'm going to be getting rid of all the lights and everything in our scene so that we can basically work from scratch. And we're going to be creating this whole setup from scratch, and then we're going to be creating some indoor lighting from scratch. So I'm just going to be selecting this. I'm going to be holding Shift and selecting all these. Let's delete them. Press delete on your keyboard. Select all this stuff as well. So basically that stuff we didn't need anyway. So I'm just going to close all this, delete all this. And I'm just going to be dragging this Soviet chair and basically putting it inside of the static mesh. And yeah, so that's basically our scene. Right now you're going to see that we have no lighting. If, for example, you want to modify the scene in any way, I would recommend you to just go to your unlit mode, and then you can just place all your objects in your unlit mode, and then move on to the lighting part. Right, so what I'm going to do is that firstly I'm going to be creating the basic lighting setup which we had previously from scratch. So I'm just going to go to Window, and inside Window you're going to see this thing right here which is called Environment Light Mixer. If I just open that, you're going to see that it's going to come up right here. Now this is basically sort of like now you can think of this as sort of like a light creator in Unreal Engine 5, and basically you can just create all these buttons one by one, and it's going to create everything for us automatically. So you can just create skylight first, atmospheric light, create sky atmosphere, create volumetric clouds, and then create height fog. Now basically you're going to see that everything which we had previously is created. However, again, one problem which you're seeing right now is the fact that the shadows were looking pretty good previously, right? And now they're looking very bad. And if you remember one thing, what I told you was that basically we had the skylight on, we had checked a certain setting in skylight, which was giving us those shadows. So I'm just going to do that. So just go to skylight, and then if you go down to real-time capture, and if you turn it on, you're going to see that our lighting is going to look pretty good, right? So I think it looks pretty decent. Now, one thing which you might be noticing is the fact that the direction of the sun is different than it was previously. So I think right now the sun is somewhere there behind the clouds, and previously I think it was somewhere there. Anyway, so how exactly do you move the sun? You simply select the directional light, and let's see where it is. If for example you can't find a specific object right now, we do know that it's right there. But for example, if you can't find it, you just have to double click it, and then it's going to take you to that specific object. It's going to make that specific object, bring that specific object to the center of the screen. Anyway, so now we can just use the rotate tool to simply rotate the sun. If I just rotate this, you're going to see that the light is going to rotate like that. Isn't it cool? And that's perfect, right? You can even just move it to the top, or you can just create a sunset scene, and it's going to change the light color accordingly, automatically. And that's perfect, right? One thing which you might be noticing right now is the fact that if I take this sun to the edges, and if the scene becomes darker, you're going to see that the brightness of the screen, the exposure of the scene is increasing automatically. And if I just bring it to the top, you're going to see that at first it's very bright, but then the exposure automatically adjusts. Now that is something good when you're just working on a regular scene in which you don't want complete control. I think that is fine in that scene. However, if you want complete control over the lighting, I would actually recommend you to turn off auto exposure in this and just use manual exposure. If you're familiar with maybe photography or videography, you know that exposure, using the manual mode in your camera and controlling the exposure is very important, right? So what I'm going to do for that is that I'm going to go to add. Here, by the way, you can basically add any sort of objects. For example, if you want to add like a cube, then you can just go here and add shapes and then cube, and you can then move this wherever you want to bring it up, and then you can apply textures to this and do whatever you want essentially, right? So I'm just going to be deleting this for now. But yeah, what you can add as well is that you can just go to visual effects, and then you can add a post-process volume. And now if I do that, you're going to see that we have this sort of cube in our scene, which is basically doing nothing at this point. So basically what this is that you can sort of add specific effects to this post-process volume, and they're going to take effect only inside of this volume. So for example, if I just go inside this post-process volume, you're going to see that right now nothing happens. That is because our post-process volume does not have any effects right now, right? So if I just bring this here, and if, for example, now what I do is that so for example, now if I just go down and I go in the details panel, and let's say I go to the global. So let's say I increase the contrast by, I don't know, something like 80%, 1.8. You're gonna see that right now nothing is happening. But if I go inside my post-process volume, as I go inside it, you're gonna see that that effect is gonna take place, and it's gonna be visible to us as long as we're inside this post-process volume, right? But if I get out of it, you're gonna see that it's gonna go back to default. If I go inside it, you're gonna see that that effect is gonna kick in, right? And so basically, this is useful for making certain adjustments. For example, the adjustment which we are concerned about right now is if I go to exposure, you're going to see that the metering mode is set to auto exposure histogram. If I set this to manual, now basically we have full control over our exposure, but only if we are inside of our post-process volume, right? You're going to see that if I go inside this, it becomes really dark because our exposure compensation is set to just 1. If I set this to something like 9, I think that should be good. Now, if I get out of this, you're going to see that it's going to become auto exposure again, and it's going to expose automatically. It's going to take some time, but it's going to expose automatically. But if I go inside this, you're going to see that it's going to become, it's automatically going to go inside the manual exposure mode, right? So basically, now this is all fine and dandy. However, the problem is, how do we add this effect to the whole scene without having to sort of scale up the post-process volume and just having it just be and increasing the size of it to sort of cover the whole scene? How do we apply the effect to the whole scene without doing that? You basically simply just go to search and you search for infinite. Basically, you search for infinite extent unbound. If I just turn this on, you're going to see that even if I get out of my exposure, get out of my post-process volume, the settings which we set are actually still in effect. If I just increase the contrast, you're going to see that everything is going to be as it is, even when we're outside of the post-process volume, right? So I'm just going to reduce the contrast back again. And so what I usually like to do is I usually just like to scale this down quite a lot, something like that. Then I just like to move it aside and then just not worry about it at all until I want to sort of change some settings. But yeah, it's going to affect the whole scene. And that's what we were trying to achieve. Basically, what we were trying to achieve is that we wanted to set the exposure automatically. So I think 9.5 exposure compensation should be the sweet spot. And now you're going to see that if I change my directional light, if I rotate my directional light and give it a sunset look, you're going to see that the exposure is going to stay the same. So it just gives you some extra control over what you can do in your scene. I think something like that might be a good exposure value. Perfect. Right, so we're done with that. Right, so next up, we're going to be working on adding custom lights, right? Because obviously we won't always want an outdoor lighting setup, right? We have to light indoor scenes as well and stuff like that. So for that, what I'm going to do is that firstly, I'm just going to be creating some walls around this. You basically have two options. Either you can just create some walls around this. You can basically just hold Alt on your keyboard and basically just select any object, hold Alt on your keyboard and then move it with Alt pressed. And that's sort of going to create a copy of it. It's going to duplicate it. You're going to see we have floor and then floor 2, which is the copy. And then you can just rotate it like this to create a wall. So basically that's your first option. Another option which you have to practice your lighting is basically to sort of go down into the content browser. And then you can just search, open this filters option. And then you can go to level. And then you're going to have this level right here, starter map. So if you open this level and just save selected, you're going to see that we have this whole setup, this whole scene, which has quite a lot of materials and stuff like that for you to like play around with and just practice some stuff with, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be selecting this fire thing right here, and I'm going to be deleting it and this as well, because we don't really want that right now. And the good thing about this is that we can sort of experiment with glass as well. And then we have some other walls and stuff like that pre-made so that we can test our materials and lighting and stuff like that. So I'm just going to be using this. Plus we also have a window as well, so we can use that as well, right? So firstly, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be deleting everything which we don't want. So audio, we don't want that. Audio is mainly useful for, what do you call it, for games and stuff like that, but since we're not really using any, since we're not creating games in this course, we're not going to be needing that. And we are going to need those lighting effects. Yeah, so basically this light is going to go and all the lights are going to go. And let's just close all this. Let's just close this folder, physics actors. So basically what this is, you might be wondering what these are, sphere reflection captures. Now basically in Unreal Engine 4, the way reflections worked was basically by adding these sphere reflection captures, right? However, in Unreal Engine 5, they've basically introduced that lumen lighting setup, and now you don't really need them, so we're just going to be getting rid of them. You can still use them, but they're not necessary because of the new lumen lighting setup. It's basically a dynamic lighting system which works automatically. And these text labels, I might actually delete them because just to make our scene a little more simple. And instance foliage actor, I'm just going to delete that as well. We are going to cover foliage later on, but yeah, for now, let me just get rid of all these empty folders. Let's collapse everything. Actually, let's delete all the lights as well so that we start working on the lighting by ourselves. Right, so our lighting is gone. Now, firstly, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be adding a light. So basically, you just go to add, and then you go to lights, and then you have a few options for the lights, right? Now, this is the directional light, which we just used. This is basically the sunlight. If I add it, you're going to see that we have the sunlight. Obviously, we don't have the atmosphere and everything, so that's why it looks weird. However, the sunlight is right there for you. And then we have a point light. So basically, the point light is, I mean, if you know any traditional 3D software, then you would know that a point light is just a point light. It's just it's sort of a sphere which is emitting light, and you can use it to, you can use it mainly to just fill in scenes with some light. I would not recommend you to actually use this as your primary light source, and I'm going to be showing you, I'm going to be telling you the reason in just a bit. But if I just go ahead and add lights, and then if I add a rect light, I'm going to be covering the spotlight in just a bit, but let me show you an example. Firstly, I'm just going to be importing a rect light. As basically this rect light is the light which we're primarily going to use. And the reason for this is because if I just turn off my point light, and if I place my rect light somewhere there, and if I rotate it, because obviously it's pointing to the other direction, if I place it like that, you're going to notice one thing, and that is that the shadows of these objects are very smooth. Right, the shadows are very smooth, and the whole scene is looking a little, obviously it is a little overexposed because we don't have our post-process volume in. However, the scene is looking good, right? Now, if I just replace this with the point light, you're going to notice one thing. If I just add the point light instead, you're going to see, let me just place it at the same position so you can have a direct comparison. So basically you can see the shadows are very sharp, right? And basically everything looks a little more hard, like the lighting looks a little harder. And that's basically because of the fact that and that's how physics works in real life as well. Basically, the smaller your light source is, the sharper and the longer your shadows are going to be. And because this is a point light, basically the light source is very small. It's just a point, and in this you basically, and the rect light, you have this sort of box, right? This sort of rectangle which is emitting light, right? And you can even control the size and stuff, size and the width and height of this by simply first selecting the rect light and then going down into the details panel, and then you can just increase the width. You can see that the width is increasing, and then you can also increase the height as well. And you're going to notice that up to a certain point, if I decrease it like that, you're going to see that the shadows become sharper. But if I keep increasing it, I want you guys to sort of stay focused at the shadows, because I want you guys to notice that the shadows slowly start getting softer. Now, I'm just going to be turning this off, and let's open the point light. Now, you do have an option with the point light to get soft shadows as well. However, that light does not look that realistic generally. But if you do want soft shadows with this light, what you want to do is that you want to go down to the source radius and you want to increase this. Now, basically, this is sort of like, this is increasing the size of this sphere, this point which is emitting light. And so you're going to see as I increase it, the shadows do get a little softer. However, still you're going to notice that the shadows do look a little weird back there. So I would definitely recommend you to still use the area light. However, if you do want to use this point light, you can use it as well. And you can also increase the source, soft source radius. So basically this is also just to sort of, this is just to modify how the lighting looks so that you can make adjustments however way you want, right? And basically in all lights you're going to have this option which says use temperature, and if I show you the rect light as well, you're going to see that in that you also have this use temperature option. This is basically an option which you can use to sort of change the color of your light. If I just turn off this point light and if I use this rect light, you're going to see that if I go down and use temperature, you're going to see if I reduce the temperature, it's going to become very yellowish. But if I increase it, you're going to see it's going to become very bluish, right? So that's how your temperature works in Unreal Engine 5. You can also add like a custom light to this, a custom, what do you call it, color to this. However, I would not recommend you to do that because of the fact that it doesn't look that realistic. I would recommend you to just stick to this temperature scale and just use this, because these are just natural colors on the Kelvin scale. So that and that is why it looks very realistic and stuff like that, right? So basically, I'm just going to be turning this off, and so now 2 of our lights are covered. Now let's move on to the next light. Let me just close this. Let's move on to our next light, which is going to be the spotlight, and this is, as the name suggests, it's a spotlight. You just have to bring it up, and it's only going to be illuminating a certain part of your scene. So if you want to have like a very dramatic scene in which you're for example, you're having like a criminal interrogation, then you're gonna wanna have this spotlight on the top of the table, and it really depends on the art direction you want and on the style of art you want. And right now we're going to be noticing the fact that this is very overblown. So let's just go ahead and add a post-process volume, and then we're going to be controlling the exposure with it. So I'm just going to go to Add, Visual Effects, Post-process volume, and then I'm just going to be moving it down so that we just move it out of the way and search for infinite. I just write inf and it just comes up, and turn it on, and then go back to exposure, and then turn on the metering mode and the exposure compensation. Set this metering mode to manual, and then this to something, I think 8 might be good. 8 is too less. I think maybe 10 should be good. Yeah, so that's basically how your spotlight works. Again, you can control the spotlight in many different ways. So firstly, you can increase the intensity. This, by the way, you can do with pretty much all the lights. You can just select them and increase the intensity if you want. So that's pretty obvious, and you can change the light color as well, but I wouldn't recommend you. I would recommend you to use this use temperature option. And then you have this cone angle, which is basically used to sort of control where the light goes. So basically this is the inner cone, which is going to be sort of the focus of the light, and this is going to be the spread of the light. And so basically if you reduce this like that, you're going to see that the main focus of the light is going to be there, but the light is not spreading that much either, right? But if you increase this outer cone angle, you're going to see that the light is going to spread quite a lot, but the main focus is going to be still that. So you can just play around with this and modify it to your own liking and to your own scene, right? So I think that is good. And another option which you have in pretty much all lights is this indirect lighting intensity. Right now you're going to notice the fact that the shadows are very dark, right? If I go under there, you're going to see that it's very dark. Now in some cases you're going to want that. In other cases you're not going to want that. So if you don't want that, if you want these parts to be brighter, then what you're going to do is that you're going to be increasing the indirect lighting intensity. As I increase that, you're going to see that the parts which were previously very dark become very bright, right? So that's how you do that. Now obviously I do want to mention one thing here, which is that in a lot of situations where you have like some reflective material in the dark parts, you would not want to use this as much. I am going to show you another way to do that, because of the fact that you're going to see these reflections are going to become very blurry and very noisy in the dark parts. So that's a limitation of Unreal Engine 5 currently. However, I do hope that in the future versions, they sort of make this more efficient and make this better. But for now, this is a limitation that your reflections are not going to look that great unless you're using path tracing. And in that case, it's going to look perfect. So let me show you how this looks in path tracing. So I'm just going to go to Lit and then go down to path tracing. You're going to see that this is how the scene would look if it was rendered in maybe something like Blender or something like that, because this is sort of your traditional 3D renderer, which is present in pretty much all traditional 3D softwares, and this is the real-time renderer, right? So there's that. Now, if you want to sort of preserve your reflections and stuff like that, and you also want to have, and you also want to light up the dark scenes, what you want to do is that you want to sort of return this to default. So I want you guys to use point lights as fill lights. What do I mean by that? I'm simply going to be, first, let me just close all this stuff. And let me just turn this point light on. And basically what we're going to do is that we're going to be placing these point lights where we want there to be some extra light. So something like that I think should be a good position. And this is what I mainly use point lights for, to be honest, because point lights are really good for just adding some fill light into places where we don't actually have light. Let's just add this right there, but be sure to not go overboard because point light will look pretty bad. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be obviously reducing the intensity to something like 1, not even 1, I think 0.5. That might be good. I'm going to press G to go into game mode. You can press G to go into game mode, and what that's going to do is that that's going to sort of hide all the widgets that you have, so you can look at the scene without any widgets. I'm going to see that if I ignore that reflection down there, you're going to see that we have sort of lit up this whole scene and the reflections look fine as well. Now, what do we do about that reflection? You basically have to sort of hide this in positions where it's not that visible, right? So maybe something like that might be good, and maybe we can increase some intensity. Now, one thing which you might be noticing is the fact that this light is actually causing some shadows and it's looking really bad in the background. So how do you fix that? You simply just select the light, then you go down to the details panel, and then you just simply go down to cast shadows and just turn that off. Because all we're concerned with this is the fact that it is lighting our scene a little bit. We don't really want shadows in this, and you can do that with any light as well. So if I just turn off cast shadows, you're going to see that the shadows are going to go away, and obviously it looks really bad, but yeah, that's how you can do that, right? So just save everything, by the way, if you're following along, and then I think we should move on to the next light, which is going to be if I go to lights, you're going to see that we have the skylight next. Now the skylight, as we covered before, is basically a light which is sort of just used to illuminate the whole scene, and this is mainly used with the directional light. So I'm not going to be using it that much here, but yeah, you can use it if you want, right? So basically the way you use this is by simply first adding going to lights and then adding a directional light. Now you're going to see that we have this direction light. If I just move it something like that, right? And now right now you're going to see that because we have these lights, the shadows are slightly brighter, but if I turn them off, you're going to notice that the shadows are very, very dark, right? How do we fix those dark shadows? You simply use the skylight in this. If I turn the skylight on, nothing really happens. But if I turn real-time capture on, you're going to see now the shadows are going to look a lot better. But if I go ahead and turn real-time capture on, still nothing is going to happen. And that is because we also do need a sky atmosphere with this and volumetric cloud component with this as well. And for those, what you do is you simply go to Window, Environment Light Mixer, and then you add a sky atmosphere, volumetric clouds, and then height fog. Because what the skylight does is that basically this uses the sky to sort of light up your whole scene, right? But obviously for it to do that, it needs to have a sky, right? And previously in our scene, we did not have a sky, right? So that's how lighting works in Unreal Engine 5. I really hope you do know the basics now of how the basic lights work. And that's pretty much it, right? You can use, you can basically position the lights in different places and you can sort of experiment around with these lights. So let me just show you how to maybe add sunlight to your scene, right? From sunlight which is coming from a window. So I'm just going to be using this direction light, and I'm going to be moving it somewhere there. And so let's just do something like that. And so basically this light is coming in from the window and it is sort of illuminating our scene as well. But what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be duplicating these walls. I'm just going to be duplicating these walls, holding Alt on my keyboard and then duplicate them so that we sort of fill the scene, fill our room from all sides, cover our room from all sides. And so basically, if I go inside this, now you're going to see that all the lights which we have in our scene are basically lit from the sunlight, right? This is basically the sunlight lighting. And you can increase your post-process volume exposure compensation to something like 11. I think that looks better. And yeah, I think that's pretty good. Also, you have a lot of settings in your post-process volume. Right now, you're going to see that where there's basically in the very bright areas of our image, there is some bloom. There's basically some glowiness to it, right? And you can control that as well. So if I just click on bloom, you're going to see that we have the intensity and method. So basically this is the standard method, which does not, in my opinion, look that realistic. However, in some scenes it does look good. But if I go to convolution, you're going to see that although in this scene, we're not really noticing that much of a difference. However, in most scenes, convolution looks much more realistic. And you can also control the intensity. If you want too much bloom, then you can do that. And if you don't want any bloom, just set it down to 0 and it's going to get rid of all the bloom, right? So there's that.